welcome to another episode of Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and today I've got a very interesting topic for us to have a chat to. I'm chatting with Simon Roche from South Africa, and the reason is that South Africa is an area in our world at the moment where there's a lot of news going on, and it's actually coming into our news headlines, but there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of missing information. And what we're going to do today is actually start filling in some of that missing information. I have to confess, I don't know half of what there is to know about South African history, modern history, ancient history, or even recent history. I've read a couple of books. We've got some, great leaders, world leaders that have come out of South Africa. We know we like their rugby and their cricket teams when they're touring. But what is the background for all of the conflict, the stresses, and the headlines that are going on in South Africa today? Joining me right now, pleased to welcome to Pellowe Talk, Simon Roche. Simon, how are you today?
Well, thanks, and yourself, Dave?
Doing very well. We've had a big week here in Australia, in my neck of the woods and activity. Having a couple of meetings publicly that are to do with free speech and multiculturalism, and that's not entirely different from the topics we're touching on tonight. Tell me, why is it that so many people around the world are contacting you and wanting to have a chat with you? What insights do you have beyond the average white guy in South Africa?
Oh, that's a very good question. I represent an organization called Suidlanders. People can look it up. We've got a website, suidlanders.org, SUID landers.org. And Suidlanders is fundamentally a civil defense organization constituted under the specific provisions of international law, particularly, but not only, the Protocols 1 and 2 additional to the Geneva Conventions, which govern the prosecution of war as it pertains to civilians. And we're preparing for a civil war. So we're an organization of, as people would like to have it, crazy, racist right-wingers who want to kill black people.
Right. Yeah, of course.
But the simple reality, the simple reality is this, that we as an organization are constituted overwhelmingly by pretty moderate Christian conservative family men. We're not rabid right-wingers, we're not maniacs. And I, for one, was for a long time an ANC activist and supporter, and I did a lot of work, not as an employee, indirectly, as a contractor, that is to say, for both the ANC as a party and for the government.
So for the young players watching at home, what's the ANC? How does that fit into a political spectrum that Australians might understand?
Yeah, the global mainstream media would have the ANC, that is to say, African National Congress of Nelson and Winnie Mandela fame, as a centrist party. But the ANC is in fact not a standalone organization. It is part of what's known as the Tripartite Alliance, which is a supposedly indivisible alliance of the ANC, the political aspect of the alliance, the South African Communist Party, the ideological aspect of the alliance, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which is the activist grassroots facet or aspect of the alliance.
Wow, and that sounds fairly leftist.
Very leftist. To give you a sense of perspective, Nelson Mandela would occasionally go to churches and cathedrals and things at Easter time and come out and stand on the steps and be interviewed by the television cameras and say, Jesus Christ is an example to us all, and wah, 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 wah. But it transpired after his death, it was revealed by two of his peers, that he remained clandestinely a member of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party to the day of his death.
Wow.
So the ANC roots are very much dyed-in-the-wool communist.
Wow.
And in fact, one of the big complaints within the ANC at the moment is that they haven't yet fulfilled the National Democratic Revolution, which is a socialist revolution, and people who are interested can read about it.
Yeah.
And so we're preparing fundamentally for a civil war because we see a trajectory. If you take our state from, let's say, 24 years ago, we held the first multiracial democratic elections in South Africa on the 27th of April, 1994. And you put on a graph the trajectory of education, health, administration, governance, and so on. There's been a dramatic decline. And now we're in a situation where there's unrest across the entire country. And there's a lot of fractiousness, a lot of agitation about expropriating land without compensation. And both sides are becoming more and more anxious over it.
So expropriating basically means the government taking your land off you. And when you say expropriating without compensation, that means the government says to you, we own this land, you no longer do now. You might have had a business on it, you might have had a farm on it, you might have had a home on it, but you have until this date and time, which might be a week or a month, or I don't know how quickly it happens, but at this date and time, if you're here, we're going to forcibly remove you and everything on it, destroy it, own it, whatever. So get lost, and you've got no claim or complaint or payment for the asset that they've taken off you.
Absolutely. The best word in English for the average English speaker, be they in Australia, South Africa, or elsewhere, is confiscation. Right. That's really what it amounts to.
Okay, so they're confiscating
this process,
lands, yeah.
Yeah, this process is going to take time. The Parliament has mandated the process in a vote that was 3-1 for it.
Wow.
So pretty overwhelming.
How tyrannical. The tyranny of democracy, I call that.
Yeah, exactly. As I always say, democracy is government by the lowest common denominator. So it's always going to be tyrannical to the most base instincts of any given populace. This process, it requires a change to our constitution. Article 25 or Section 25 of our constitution will have to be amended, because prior to 1994 and after 1994, there were a whole series of negotiations in which the ANC said we will always respect property rights. Property rights are sacrosanct, and so on and so forth. But it's just turned out to be nonsense.
So the Communist Party has reverted to type. Private property must
absolutely.
be destroyed.
As the Communist Party always does. You know, the Communist Party can pose as a wolf in sheep's clothing, but that doesn't mean that it's a sheep. Yeah. You know, we had a rash of pedophilia incidents about something like 10 years ago in South Africa, and I was at a what do you call this? A park, you know, fun fair with two of my sons, and there was a little incident. I don't think it was necessarily a pedophilia incident, but it was kind of not a good thing. And I said to them afterwards, look, you boys are too young for me to say this to you, but I don't have a choice because I love you and I'm desperate. And so I very bluntly said to them, if a man wants to fondle your winky or stick his finger in your bum, he's not going to come to you with a chopper in his hand and say, "Rah, I'm going to chop you up and eat you. I'm going to steal you from your daddy." He's going to say, "Would you like an ice cream?" And unfortunately, we live in a modern paradigm where Western Europeans in the Christian tradition have been browbeaten into abandoning common sense, into accepting at face value any sort of left-wing rhetoric. And we've abandoned some sort of a common sense filter that our forefathers had.
Our ability to think critically. We're told if we think critically, we're full of hate and fear. We call it a phobia.
Yes, absolutely. The simple reality is that in South Africa, we've been overwhelmed by a constant deluge of politically correct rhetoric for close to 40 years, to the point where people will believe anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Regardless, they will believe it, as long as it comes from the mainstream media, the churches, the academic elite, or the global capital. You know, global capital is here for you. What is the the mantra of Ford or Google or Microsoft or whatever that global big company is? It's to build the best car for people.
Yep. Now, what's your role in Suidlanders?
I was formerly the head of the HQ.
Okay.
For implementing our national emergency plan in a time of civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And now I spend most of my time, because there's just too much work, doing this sort of thing, explaining to people what we're about.
Okay, great. Look, I want to delve deeply into what's going on in South Africa at the moment. I want to document it and inform my viewers what's going on. Help us to, think better, speak better, listen better, and pray better. But before that, I want you to take us back centuries into exactly what is the background, the backstory to all of this that's going on. You told me earlier, 1652. That's nearly 400 years ago.
That's right.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I beg your pardon, Dave. The first permanent settlement in South Africa was established on the 6th of April, 1652 in Cape Town, modern-day Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
For 125 years, up until 1777, early 1777, white people had no contact with what you and I would know as black people. The only contact they had was with Aboriginal people, which are commonly known as the Bushmen and the Hottentots, more correctly, San and Khoi people. Very little frail people, small people, petite people with very high cheekbones, who have genetically very little in common with black people as you would know black people. The black people of South Africa came from the region around Nigeria. This has been proven conclusively. And they moved eastwards towards Kenya and Tanzania through Central Africa, and then they came down the east coast. And the whites and those black people met for the first time in early 1777, after the whites had been in South Africa for 125 years, on the east bank of the Great Fish River at modern-day Somerset East.
You're blowing my mind right now. What I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that black people arrived in South Africa after white people.
No, not strictly speaking. The black people had entered the north of modern-day South Africa,
right,
prior to whites entering the southwest. But in between was a grey area without either party.
Right,
and the two parties came together after a considerable period of time.
So the black people were progressively migrating further south, and the white people essentially beat them to the very south.
Yeah, that's correct. So the white people had explored and begun to occupy about 40 to 45% of modern-day South Africa, the western portion.
Okay. And then what happened when they met?
When they met, they initially, in 1795, they reached an agreement whereby the whites would remain in perpetuity west of the Great Fish River, and the blacks would remain in perpetuity east of the Great Fish River. And it was left at that. Then the agreement was broken 9 times, if I'm not mistaken. There were many minor incursions, but in a kind of a significant, meaningful, big way, it was broken nine times by the black tribes. And the white guys exacted retribution, so there are 2 sides to the story there. It's very clear that the one party was breaking the agreement. It's also very clear that the other party was exacting a heavy retribution. Every time the black tribes came across the Great Fish River and raped a few women and, did the things that they did, then the whites would band together on their horses and go across and, kind of kill 5 times as many as the blacks had killed to make a point.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a very interesting phenomenon.
Was making a point successful? Did they learn a lesson, stay in their space for 10 years, or was it irrelevant?
Yeah, it was successful. You know,
Okay.
it would bring the incursions to a halt for a while, and there would be peace, and then it would resume all over again.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's interested, if they bring up a map of South Africa on their computers, perhaps on Google Earth, they'll observe the province of KwaZulu-Natal in the east, and just to the west of it is the mountain kingdom of Lesotho, which was granted to the Basotho people by Queen Victoria. Now, there's a very interesting thing to observe. All of the famous Bushman rock art exists. We're now talking significantly eastward of this Great Fish River border.
Mm-hmm.
All of the famous Bushman rock art exists in the mountain fastnesses around Lesotho and in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. But there are no Bushmen there. All of the Bushmen were towards the Cape where the white people met them. And the simple reason is that a genuine, actual genocide was perpetrated on the Aboriginal people of South Africa by the broad-shouldered, dark-skinned black people, as you and I know black people to be.
Okay.
It's a very, very interesting thing.
And just a note for the viewers, Aboriginal is an exchangeable word for native, people originally there. So we use that in Australia all the time, but every nation around the world has Aboriginal people.
Yes, absolute original, kind of like ab initio from the very beginning.
Okay, great.
So, so this is a very, very interesting phenomenon for people to get their heads around. You know, in this land expropriation scenario, the Khoi and the San people, the Hottentots and the Bushmen, to use the crass terms, are saying, hey, what about us? We were here first. And everybody knows that we were here first. So you're fundamentally expropriating our land, really. And recently, the king of the Aboriginal people, King Kubaha, has declared a unilateral secession. This is a massive thing.
They're still tribal or consider themselves a nation with their own ruling system and everything. Do they run?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Wow.
Absolutely.
You know, I was going to ask what happened to all the Bushmen, all the smaller, lighter skinned people who were at the very southern end of South Africa all along.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of interest to you, and to this day, a white-dominated political party has maintained control of Cape Town and the Western Cape Province almost for the entire period from democracy. The ANC has never ruled there. Well, it has for a short period. And that's because the colored people who insist upon being called colored, the mixed race people, who are largely a mix of white and Aboriginal people, refuse to vote for the blacks.
Wow.
And to this day, the colored people hold two events that they insist upon calling Coon carnivals.
Wow.
At which they sing.
That's a highly insulting, inflammatory word here in Australia.
You're absolutely, but I'm quoting them. Let's just be clear on this. This is the colored people insist upon calling their events Coon carnivals, and they won't have it any other way. They refuse to be called black. They insist upon calling themselves colored. And at those Coon carnivals, they famously sing certain songs devoted to the Confederate States of the United States. For example, a song that goes, "Here comes the Alabama," referring to a warship. "Here come the Dixies."
Wow, that's got to upset the Marxists a whole lot. That's not.
It drives them berserk. It drives them mad. It drives them absolutely crazy. That these mixed race people want nothing to do with the
identity politics that they promote all the time. How
exactly
for them.
Exactly. So
Marxists more mad.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing than to have an identity, you know. So that gives you some perspective on how things really were and are to some extent in South Africa. The story is far different than Nelson Mandela and the newspapers in Australia and the television stars in Australia and the celebrities and the politicians have been singing, just as they have in the rest of the world for the past 40 years, including the period prior to the fall of apartheid and so on, which is not to say that apartheid was a grand and wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. It's, let's say, for example, you did me some harm. Let's say you robbed me, for argument's sake.
Right.
It's not that you're innocent of robbing me, but the case that you will make to the magistrate or the judge is, I didn't attempt to murder him. I didn't bash Simon over the head. It's not about exonerating or exculpating white people for every transgression of the past in South Africa. It's about saying what you're being told is completely and utterly false. Not that we're innocent of every allegation, but the truth is vastly different to how it has been painted by the academic elites and others.
Very interesting. So what other significant milestones are there in the story of South Africa between 1800 and recent history?
Well, I suppose, there was the period between 1800, give or take, a little bit later really, but give or take 1800, when the process began with the transfer of the Cape to Great Britain, up to 1900, which was really about the founding of the interior of South Africa, the establishment of 2 Boer republics, 3 in fact, one of which was stolen by Great Britain and 2 of which were, stolen by Great Britain. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, to today, if people do the research, they can find this for themselves. There exist letters written home and reports sent home and diaries by the London Missionary Society, which explain at great length how the interior, the hinterland of South Africa, was depopulated. There was just nothing there, where there were no people. These missionaries would sometimes travel for weeks on end without seeing anybody.
When you say depopulated, do you mean unpopulated or the population removed, depopulated?
I mean that there was a famous series of wars called the Imfetane, in which, let me begin by saying this. Typically, in a war, the fatality rate is something between 10 and 25% of the combatants.
Okay.
In the European wars that the 7 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, First World War, Second World War, so on.
Right.
It's considered, 25% is considered a high fatality rate, and we're talking about the combatants only.
Right.
In the Imfetane Wars, which began in about 1820 and ended in about 1834 in South Africa, mm-hmm. up to 2/3 of the entire population of Black Africans were killed. And this is per the records of liberal sources only. There are no conservative sources. I can quote chapter and verse for you. Liberal sources only. Make it very clear.
Was that in wars against the British?
No, these are internecine Black African wars.
Oh, against each other?
Against each other. Okay. Zulus against Xhosas, Xhosas against Bata, Bata against Abatembu, Zulus against Tsonga in the north, Zulus against Botswana, Zulus against Basotho. Yes, strictly, only, solely.
I haven't heard of most of those names before, but some I have.
Yeah, so they killed about 2/3 of one another, which is unheard of.
Wow.
In the world.
Wow. Yeah.
And so in those depopulated lands, the white people began to move in areas that...
Yeah, well, that answers my question. You literally mean depopulated by war.
Yes.
With each other. Yes. Wow. Yes.
As recorded extensively by an entity which is famously anti the Boers, anti the Afrikaner people of South Africa, namely the London Missionary Society. And again, your viewers, if they're interested, can read up on it and test me, but this is a fact. London Missionary Society hated the Boers, but they were the first to say about 2/3 of all Black people killed nobody living here, nothing for miles around, hundreds of miles, no people, weeks, we haven't seen people, so on and so forth. And that's where the Boer republics were established. And very interestingly,
Yep.
in the province of Natal, KwaZulu-Natal, they established another republic which was based on the purchase of a massive tract of land. Once the purchase had gone through, the Zulus then massacred the Boer women and children who came in.
And the Boer, who are they exactly?
The Boer people are an amalgam of three groups of Protestants who came to South Africa fleeing persecution in Europe. Firstly, in 1652, Dutch Calvinists who set up a way station for the Dutch East India Company. Mm-hmm. Then the Huguenots who were fleeing the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, subsequent to the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre, where the Protestants were murdered in France. Mm-hmm. And then German Lutheran soldiers, more or less men only, who were demobilized following the wars against the papacy in central Germany. Germany to this day remains largely Catholic in the south and largely Protestant in the north. And that was, the papal wars there led, once they were more or less resolved, to lots of men milling around with nothing to do. And so male German Protestants, Lutherans came out. So, and those three gene pools amalgamated to form the Boer people of South Africa. The whites of South Africa are about 4.8 million of about 56 million people. So we're something like 8 to 9% of the population of South Africa.
Okay.
Let's call it 9% for the sake of a round number. Mm-hmm. Of that, the Boers are about 55 to 60%. Okay. The rest of us are English-speaking, Lebanese, Greek, Italian, Portuguese, whatever.
Right.
So the whites of South Africa are dominated by the scions, as it were, the successors to those three groups of people that came following 1652. Mm-hmm. So they moved into those lands. They bought. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to remind you where you were before I asked who the Boer were. Did I say that right? We say Boer over here, but
it doesn't really matter. Some of these
Boer.
Yeah, Boer and Suidlanders. I spent 6 months in the USA, and people just cannot say Suidlanders. I met 3 people who could say Suidlanders.
Socialist.
That's not too bad. I must admit. So these guys go into Natal, they buy all this land, and once the deal is done, the Zulu king has them slaughtered by ramming stakes up their rectums and out through the tops of their spines.
Oh, no. What year was this, roughly?
16th of February, 1838.
Well, that's very specific.
On that night, the Zulu king then sent his impis, his soldiers, to slaughter all the women and children who were at the wagon lagers. And there were 3 great massacres in which all of the women were gutted. And one of 2 things would happen. If there was a fetus in the woman's womb, given that it was a time when our people believed in themselves and they bred, so most of the women would be pregnant, or a significant proportion. They would gut the woman and take the fetus out and kill it separately by smashing its head against the wagon wheels. This is extensively recorded. Very, very, very extensively recorded. And if the woman was not pregnant, they would cut out her gallbladder and drink the gall, and then they would shout the slogan, "Ngatla," meaning "I have eaten."
Wow, that's incredibly debased. I can't. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of good words for it, but how empty of morality must a culture be?
Well, Dave, you're touching on an extremely sensitive subject now. At some point, you and I will doubtless discuss the rate of murder in South Africa. And I can say to you categorically that there's no other organization in South Africa that is not, to some extent, hidebound by doctrine. The doctrine being a sort of a conciliatory compromise with the prevalent narrative of the new South African rainbow nation. So even right-wing organizations in South Africa will not tell you the mathematical facts that I'll tell you when we'll get onto this subject.
Just a quick side note for viewers. Rainbow Nation in South Africa has nothing to do with the rainbow agenda in Australia of the homosexual mafia. It's to do with the spectrum of ethnic colours and ethnic diversity. So it's a good diversity.
Yeah. So, it's one has to be very careful about criticizing other cultures, but we, Suidlanders, are introspective.
I think cultures should be criticized.
Well,
including my own.
For us, it's not about hating somebody else. It's about looking inwards and loving ourselves and rediscovering self-respect.
Look,
because the white peoples of the world.
You feel free to disagree me and shoot the messenger, me. But a culture that is capable of routinely removing babies from mothers' wombs and smashing their heads against wagon wheels is broadly sociopathic. There's something incredibly broken over and over and over again in the members of that culture. And there should be a level of embarrassment and determination to do better and mature beyond that.
Yes. There are challenges to that. I mean,
of course,
we're skating on thin ice here. But the reality is that even in South Africa today, the crime that is being perpetrated is exceedingly brutal. There hasn't been the level of transformation that one might have expected over 200 years.
And this is why the history is important. This is why we need to hear from, not people in Australia, England, and America, but this is why we need to hear from people who know the history, because if you know it, it provides context instead of subtext, and we can properly interpret and understand what's going on, what's in the thinking, what's in the background, and what's in the future.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I'm putting the cart a bit before the horse here, but whether people like it or not, let me put it this way: the murder rates, what they technically call the intentional homicide rates of Western Europe, are about 1 per 100,000 per annum. The intentional homicide rate in the USA is 4.88 per 100,000 per annum. And I'm sure that we can all agree that there is a sort of preconception in the mainstream media of the Western world that the USA is psychopathic.
Absolutely.
There is a hint at that.
Yeah. What's wrong with Americans? Why don't they fix their country? They just have to ban guns and everything will be all right. It's
because
a high murder rate.
Yeah, because they're all dying all the time and they're all being shot to death. Right, that's 4.88.
Massacres left, right, and centre. Yeah, every other day in some school. Yeah.
Right. The murder rate of in South Africa is 36 per 100,000 per annum.
That's more than 9 times the rate of America.
Can you see? Well, it's a 7 point something times. Can you see why we get so angry? So angry. Now that's the national murder rate. Now, so what people say is,
the world's media is obsessed with America.
Exactly. The BBC covers 11-year-olds walking down streets in America, protesting, chanting sanctimoniously about how, they're trying to influence the national debate. 11 years old and they know everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the BBC, blows this thing up.
Mm.
We're dying.
What percentage is the intentional homicide rate representative of the population mix? So is it 9% of the murder rate is white, or is it less, or is it more?
No, it's less. So what happens is that people say
black people are being disproportionately killed.
Exactly. In other words, black people kill more black people than they kill white people.
So here's the cynical point I was expecting, and I have to be honest. Believe me when I say I didn't know the answer to that question when I asked, is it representative? Is it simple? So black people are overrepresented in a intentional homicide rate in South Africa, which is more than 7 times what it is in America, and yet that puts to lie the cheap slogans of Black Lives Matter. Apparently only American Black Lives Matter. Otherwise, the world's media and world's leftists would be much more interested in the intentional homicide rate in South Africa.
But the thing is, you're right. You're 100% right. However, I'm going to begin with the word but. What disgusts us is that that argument is used to wish away our argument. In other words, people say, yes, but black people only kill a massively disgraceful number of white people, not a massively, massively, massively disgraceful number of black people as they kill one another. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's
the reality, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And our people say, we don't care. We don't want to be murdered at these rates because they're uncivilized.
Yes.
No, this is unconscionable.
Barbaric.
We don't care what the liberals of the world say. We don't care what the academics of the world say. Mm-hmm. We don't care what the mainstream media says. These rates are by the standards of civilization. Unconscionable, unacceptable, and we're not going to keep quiet. We don't care how many more of one another you kill. Go for it. Do it by all means. But let us live like civilized human beings. But there's more to the argument. About a year ago, there was a debate held in our parliament on the farm murder rate. And during that debate, one particular political party said, I should point out that in 2007, the then Minister of Police, Charles Ngakula, said, if whites don't like the crime in South Africa, in fact, he said, if people don't like the crime, but he was referring to a whole barrage of white criticism, white media, whatever. It was clearly a reference to white people. Your viewers can look it up if they're in any doubt. Mm-hmm. If they don't like the crime in South Africa, they can leave. And he was making a clear reference to packing for Perth.
Well, our Safety and Security Minister has got a message for those worried about such crimes. Stop whinging. Charles Ngakula says he's fed up with what he's called constant moaners.
51 murders a day, 151 rapes, and 347 robberies. But Charles Ngakula says we should look on the bright side. And whatever you do, do not complain to him.
They can continue to whinge until they are blue in the face. They can continue to be as negative as they want to, or they can simply leave this country.
From that point onwards, the police refused to divulge the farm murder statistics. In the absence of those statistics, last year in our parliament, a debate was held in which one political party claimed that the murder rate of farmers in South Africa is 133 per 100,000 per annum.
Wow. That's far above the European or American or even the general South African murder rate.
Yeah, this is barbarianism. We are living in a time of barbarianism.
That's how is that anything? I don't know if it's technically sufficient to call it war, but it's an astronomical assault on human life.
Yeah. 133 times the murder rate in Europe.
Wow.
That's 13,300% for those of your viewers who are not mathematicians. It's unbelievable. So another political party said, look, you're right that this is completely out of hand. But we believe that, technically speaking, we've looked at the sources such as are available. It's only 97. This is 20 times the murder rate in the USA, which is supposed to be this homicidal country.
Yep.
20 times, 2,000%. At the same time, a famous researcher called Johann Berger of the Institute of Security Studies, which is, in spite of its name, a liberal-oriented entity, said that he believed that the murder rate of farmers in South Africa is, in fact, 145 per 100,000 per annum.
Wow.
The story gets better. Stick with me.
Well,
this is Enid Blyton. Enid Blyton for adults.
Okay.
On the 5th of May, in other words, 10 days ago, 11, 12 days ago,
Right.
13, for the first time since 2007, the government, in the form of our Minister of Police, bless him, Begitele is his name, released the farm murder rate statistics.
I'm not expecting anything good.
And just by the way, this is not mathematics, huh? It's arithmetic. It's the stuff you learned in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, not grade 5. It's a simple matter of taking the number of murders and dividing it by the number of farmers. It's easy stuff. 169.7 per 100,000. We are dying like flies. We are dying at a rate that the world cannot comprehend. And we have to listen to people tell us how bad we are, how wrong we are, how we deserve it. Listen to me. There's a recent incident of a little girl, 4 years old, raped by 3 men, 3 grown men, a 4-year-old. Can you imagine the size of her vulva? Can the perverse, evil liberals who will watch your show, the wicked women and men, but women particularly, who will watch your show because they hate you and because they hate Jesus Christ, can they at least imagine the size of that child's vulva when those 3 men entered her? She survived the rape.
Wow.
So they bundled her up in newspaper, doused it in petrol, and set it alight. And she was burned to death. She survived the rape, the post-mortem autopsy revealed.
Wow.
Another little girl of 3 years old was raped by 4 men, crucified on her parents' kitchen table, and raped to death by 4 men. I say to you, David, we are enough with apologizing. Enough with apologizing.
Yep.
Enough for saying, like I was brought up a Catholic, so this is not to insult Roman Catholics, like a Roman Catholic monk, mea culpa, while lashing ourselves across the back in some kind of expiatory experience. Enough.
Mm-hmm.
Enough.
Yep.
Women are being raped. Children are being raped at a rate, on farms particularly, and farmers being murdered, at a rate that you cannot imagine. It is that alien to you. You think you can imagine because the mainstream media told you for so many years what a charming smile Nelson Mandela had. So you're firmly convinced that we're all the same, all cultures are the same, all gene pools are the same. German shepherds are just the same as cats. It's not that way. Get everything that your sociology lecturer told you about Margaret Mead out of your head once and for all. It's a fiction. It's false. It didn't make sense when she said it in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, and it doesn't make sense now. It doesn't make any sense. And that is the reason why during this entire period of, let's say in the last, give or take, since more or less the early 60s, particularly in the USA, because the USA, intellectually speaking, was in the vanguard of this revisionist sociology and anthropology. the humanities and the sciences have diverged like this. You know, all the time that the humanities were declaring, we're all the same. In psychology, anthropology and sociology particularly, we're all the same. Dog breeders and horse breeders never changed their philosophy for 1 second, because they knew that at a biological level, it was utterly false. It was fictional. When you breed with any source, you convey not only physical traits and characteristics, but temperament and intelligence too. This is not an opinion. This is a statement of fact, of scientific fact.
Yeah, I'm aware of the research. It is controversial, and it is very upsetting to those, especially on the left. But I'm aware of the research, and it's sound, and it's on a solid foundation.
Yeah, and it's not about hatred. It's not about waking up in the morning and saying, I hate Muslims, I hate this, I hate that, I hate the next thing. It's not at all about that. It's about saying that if I judge the people around me by my standards, or if I judge myself by their standards, I'm bound to make a mistake. And in a society like South Africa, we are in such a critical position that we cannot afford to delude ourselves for the sake of humoring the international zeitgeist. We have to be pragmatic and practical every step of the way. And that's why organizations like Suidlanders, we are the largest organization of our type in the world by some considerable distance.
Wow.
Organizations like Suidlanders have evolved to prepare for a crisis in South Africa, not because we're looking for a crisis. We're so hopelessly outnumbered that we don't stand a chance. But we have to look at our history and see the practical realities of the nature of our circumstances in South Africa and learn from them to ensure that we can safeguard our future.
Yep.
And we have to consider the current trajectory of South Africa to combine that with the past and say, guys, things are looking dangerous. We have to prepare for the worst.
How does Suidlanders translate to English? What does Zeit mean?
The literal translation is Southlanders, but a more correct allegorical translation would be Southerners.
Okay. Interesting.
It comes from a verse in the Bible referring to the people of the South.
Interesting.
Talking about the end times and where in the end times the chosen peoples of God will be gathered together.
Wow, very interesting. Simon, I feel like we're not even halfway through the history of South Africa, let alone the last month or year of what's been happening in South Africa. Is it all right if we put a bookmark in this and I get you on again real soon, in maybe just a couple of days?
Certainly, I'd be very grateful for that, David, and we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to speak, because our voice is being, it's being suppressed by the mainstream media. So thank you. I'd love to come on again.
All right, let's do that again soon. Thank you very much for coming on, Simon.
Thank you, Dave. Take care.
That's Simon Roche from Suidlanders, and there'll be lots of links on the web page where this video is posted. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments, a lot of conversation. I'd encourage you to keep it civil. Try and talk about facts, data, logic, and evidence. I probably won't put a lot of censorship or editing or moderating into this discussion. So let me invite you. If you are an unintelligent, stupid, hateful person, please insult everybody else's character and intelligence and personality as much as you like and prove the truth about your own. But if you would like to have a civil conversation about the facts, data, evidence, history, and logic of what we've discussed in this episode and the next one, then by all means, let's engage, let's disagree, and let's pursue truth together. What we cannot have is any justification for ongoing injustice. That is something we must all stand together against without any excuses, without any hiding whatsoever. We must have justice in our homes, in our nations, and in our world. And that will start with you. If you're not a fan of Pellowe Talk, if you're not a subscriber to the emails, let me encourage you to become a subscriber on YouTube, subscribe to the newsletters via the website, davepellowe.com. Click the little bell icon on YouTube as well, so you can be notified when the next installment in this story about South Africa's history and troubles right now comes up, so you won't miss out on anything at all. And the other thing is, this is an entirely viewer-funded initiative. Bringing conversations like this relies on viewer funding like you. And so it'd be really appreciated if you give a one-time or even an ongoing, recurring, small monthly donation. Also in the link beneath this video will be the opportunity for you to donate to Suidlanders and the very important work that they're doing in helping people defend their lives, defend their families, defend their little girls, defend their homes against evil and injustice. This work is critically important because the government is not protecting them. They are failing. If you think the murder rate in America is horrific, then please give your attention to this, because there is something you can do. You can help people protect themselves. All the links are beneath this video in the description and on this post at my website, davepellowe.com. This is important, and we mustn't shrink away from difficult conversations. But that is it for this episode of Pellowe Talk. Until the next one, stay true.